the argument from design
was once quite a powerful argument. It's the watchmaker's argument. Richard Dawkins has a book, The Blind Watchmaker, that says, well, you know, if things happen by evolution, how could they all fit together so well? It seems like everything works well in the universe. There are signs of things having been designed. Certainly people of the past thought that animals were created for us to eat and for us to wear their skins, and they pointed to other things in nature like the fact that if water did not expand when it froze, then ponds would freeze solid and fish would die and so on. There are things that people regarded as being beautifully designed, including our own organs and the organs of animals, which seem to have certain functions and purposes. But of course, now that we understand the Darwinian theory of evolution, that argument has fallen into disrepute. We understand much better how it is that we have certain organs, how it is that beings exist, that they have evolved over barely imaginable periods of time. Only those that were indeed adapted to their environment and could survive and reproduce left descendants that are still with us. And I think the fossil record now shows that, and more recently our understanding of genetics shows our own biological relationship with very simple organisms, including bacteria with whom we share some genes, and then progressively we share more genes with beings more like us until we get up to the great apes, chimpanzees, with whom we share something like 98% of our genes. So I think evolution is one of the most firmly established scientific theories with a huge amount of evidence for it, and we don't therefore need the argument from design to explain how the universe comes to be like it is. So the arguments for the existence of God seem to me to be not strong. Now, interestingly, in the Protestant tradition, those arguments fell into disrepute quite a long time ago. And so Protestants began to disavow the arguments and say, what really matters is faith. But what is faith? Faith is really just believing in something for which you have neither rational arguments nor good evidence. I know that John is a mathematician by training, so I'm sure he's familiar with the 19th century mathematician and philosopher William Clifford, who wrote a very nice essay about faith, using as an analogy a ship owner who was about to send to sea a ship full of immigrants. We can imagine they were coming to Australia, if you like, since many immigrants did set sail from England in the 19th century for Australia. And as we know, of course, you only have to go down to the Great Ocean Road and you find many places where some of those ships foundered and sank with great loss of life, for example, around Loch Ard. But this ship owner that Clifford imagines is uncertain whether his ship is seaworthy enough to make the long voyage to bring the immigrants to the new land. But he thinks about it and he says, well, look, after all, there's a divine providence. And how could a divine providence allow these good people who are going to establish their futures, men, women, and children even, who are, at least the children, innocent of any sin, how could he allow them to drown on the way to the new world? So I will have faith in God, and I won't bother to inspect the ship to see whether it's seaworthy, because I have faith that it will reach Australia. Well, of course, as I say, we know that some ships did not, and we would fault this ship owner and say, you can't just have faith in that way. You need to check the evidence. You need to look at it. The ship owner's faith would have put lives at risk, and unfortunately, in the real world today, faith also puts lives at risk. In fact, the refusal of the Roman Catholic Church to tolerate the use of condoms, even in regions of sub-Saharan Africa where the risk of contracting HIV/AIDS is extremely high, has undoubtedly not merely put lives at risk, but cost perhaps millions of innocent human lives. We pay a high price for the religious faith of some religious leaders. I don't understand why it would be a simpler explanation to say that the world was created by a divine being who has existed forever, than it would be to say that the universe has existed forever. It seems to me that to say the universe has existed forever is a simpler explanation. Now, your argument was that the universe actually hasn't existed forever, that science says there was a Big Bang, and this in some way supports the creationist account of the universe. All I'm saying is that science doesn't say that. Science only says the observable universe began 13 point something billion years ago, and with a kind of a bang, and has been expanding since. That's all it says, and that's all it can say. So I'm simply saying there is no argument here to believe that your hypothesis, that it was created by a divine being, is in any better shape than the hypothesis that it has always existed.
Yes, we are Darwinian primates. We are, that is, primates who have evolved from other primates. I think that's established scientifically. Dinesh doesn't deny it, as I understand his position. Do we have to believe that there is some transcendental spark that is contrary to the evolutionary account in order to explain why we have morality and why we behave as we do, and why occasionally heroic people jump in and save heavy, drowning strangers, although also very often they don't? I don't think we do need any such account. I think we can explain the existence of compassion, concern for others, in the way we have evolved as mammals, as beings who've had to take care of their own children, as beings who've lived in small communities where we're often related to other members of the community and want to save them and support them, and that helps the survival of our genes as well. And of course, as social beings who live in communities that reciprocate, as indeed our close primate relatives do as well. We're not unique in this. And form reciprocal bonds. And there's a lot of research that suggests that the best strategy in these conditions is, at least initially, to help strangers. And only if it turns out that they are not going to help you do you then cease to help them or even pay them back for the bad deeds they do you. The simple ethic known as tit for tat works quite well in game theory that models evolution. So it's possible to explain why we do some of the rescues we do in those ways. Some people perhaps have this to a stronger degree than others, and therefore are more likely to do the rescues.
I do think that the evidence, if you're relying on historical evidence, the evidence is extremely thin. We know that there are many cases where people claim to have seen all sorts of things, claim that they've had all kinds of visions, that people have appeared to them, that they've been cured, and generally we are skeptical about such claims.
And rightly so.
Right, okay, so you said there are documents from the 1st century, okay, but the 1st century is compatible with, if we assume that the tradition is that Jesus was crucified in around 30, then we're talking about people who were writing, who were perhaps the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren of those who were supposed to witness it. Now we know that stories get twisted and new stories get invented. You only have to play Chinese whispers with 50 people and, see what comes out at the end after you whisper something in at the beginning.
But so that isn't true, Peter, really, because the Apostle Paul was writing in the early 50s. It's much nearer to the time than that. Now, I'm a little bit older than you. I can remember things very clearly 20, 30 years back and so on. So I think the gap is
but Paul was not an eyewitness, right? I mean, Paul was reporting what other people said.
Yeah, but he was an eyewitness of something. You were saying that a lot of people, many people have to be a believer in the resurrection before they do anything else. Paul wasn't. He was absolutely against Jesus, and it was an appearance of the risen Christ that was the foundation of his conversion. So he was not a believer when he met Jesus.
Right, so it was one of these kinds of visions that I was talking about that he had, or apparition or something like that, and that's what I'm saying. We know many people have these, sometimes about their religious beliefs, sometimes about aliens coming from Mars or somewhere and kidnapping them, and we're normally very skeptical about this, and we understand that in Paul's day, people maybe were not quite so skeptical, but we would think that they should have been.